Upsizing and Downsizing. Welcome to today's Steelo Podcast, where I'll be talking about the joys of upsizing your business, growing your business, but then also downsizing as and when required. So, obviously when you start a business, you always want to grow your business. That is probably the most important measure, is how much you've grown over the last year compared to previous years, and then the main metric is to grow at 20, maybe 25% a year, and that classifies you as a company with a high growth, which is all fine. But then sometimes the economy, the fundamentals, have a different idea for your business, and things start to change. So as a company, you should be agile, but that's not necessarily possible. If you are a manufacturing company, becoming an agile company where you could basically grow and shrink with orders is almost impossible. I'm not saying it is impossible because we're working on a solution, but it is very, very difficult. Now, the natural thing to do is basically to grow your capacity. So you employ more, but then suddenly you run out of space, so you need more space. And with property, you can't just rent out for a week or two for a project. Maybe you could, but that's unsustainable. So you end up, after sort of being squashed into one place, you then overspill and you end up renting, leasing another place. Now, lease agreements, they are anything between 5 and 10 years, and basically you on the hook. So we at Steelo, we moved from our first premises from Isleworth over to our current premises in sort of Hounslow and Feltham borders, and it was a massive leap forward. We basically increased our size fivefold. That's how big the new place was compared to the old place. And that was actually done on purpose because I knew that if we only moved to a slightly larger unit, we would have outgrown it within a year or two. So we were sort of making the most of that unit, sometimes fabricating outside, and it was just like way too much for what that unit could take, but for a reason. And the reason was so that once we make the move, it will be to a much larger premises that we can afford and almost fill up on day one. And indeed, that is what happened. It was a big move for the company, and indeed it was also reflected in our financial results, because the following year the turnover was almost double compared to the previous. So it just showed how much was pent up demand for our services. Then a few years went on, and we, as a company, we always are looking for better ways of doing what we do, trying to address the issues that our customers come across, and one of those issues was the lead time. So we did a survey with our customers, and the thing that sprung up was that time is of essence, and obviously during our day-to-day operations, we also found out that there's one thing that our customers don't have enough of, and that is time. So we thought, well, the weakest link in the process from placing an order to delivering is us relying on our suppliers. So we can do whatever we want internally. We can fine-tune our operations so they are as efficient as it gets, but then we are out of control when it comes to the supply of material. So the next step was to basically keep stock ourselves, to get rid of that bottleneck or that constraint and just be able to cut immediately. And the idea was that we would offer a service that no one else could match, which would be that if you place an order today by midday, you would get your fabricated steel delivered to site tomorrow. So yeah, that was only possible with us keeping stock, and with all the other processes and procedures and software that we already had in place. So that's what we did. One of the units next to our place became available. It was a scaffolding company that had a Heathrow sort of contract coming to an end. They didn't secure the next project, so they basically had this unit as surplus to requirements. So we found out about the unit and we started the process of taking it on. And we took a lease assignment, which means basically that the lease agreement between the previous tenant and the landlord remains the same, and we just take over its entirety with all the terms and conditions. So we took it on, very excited. Obviously it was a big step forward because we doubled in size and we've got a massive yard and all of that. And we filled it up with steel. We created these special racking system that had rollers at the bottom, and you could easily offload the steelwork to the rollers below. You didn't have to move the steelwork, just lower it down. And one of the breakthrough ideas was, instead of having one central massive bandsaw that costs hundreds of thousands of pounds, we decided to go for, I think it was 5 independent small bandsaws that cost only £8,000 each. And they were on rollers, so literally on rails and rollers, so we could move them from one side of the rack to the other. And the idea here was that unlike this one central massive machine, if this one breaks down, your whole operations grind to a halt, whereas with 5 independent bandsaws, you can easily shift them around, and if one fails, then you still have 4 operating. So only 20% of your capacity goes down, and if you're able to shift the bandsaws accordingly, then there's hardly any sort of downtime. Whereas if the main one fails, then that's it, you screwed. So we filled it all up, and off we went. We started offering the service, but we did want to somehow get back the money that it cost us to run this place. So unfortunately our pricing for next day delivery, the service that I mentioned, came at a premium. And initially it worked wonders, and I was so proud. It's like, wow, this is one of those ideas that I read somewhere in a financial or pricing book, and it actually worked. Higher price because customers are so desperate, so they are willing to pay more. But unfortunately our excitement wasn't long-lived, because literally a few weeks later we found out that our customers have learned how to play the system. So in other words, they started planning ahead so that they could pay the price for having the steelwork delivered over 5 working days rather than for next day. And this was a big lesson for me, that even though we went out and surveyed our customers, they actually didn't say what they feel. And this is one of those situations where we probably should have spent more time digging deeper, asking about how they feel about things, rather than just what's the most important thing, and then they just replied time. And when comparing with pricing, they said, yeah, time is more important than pricing. I'm willing to pay more, but have it on time, and so on. But then when it came to fulfilling that request, unfortunately, that didn't work out. So the other thing that happened, one of our suppliers realized that if they are able to adjust their operations so that they can cut overnight for us, then we would shift our orders back to them. And that is exactly what happened. They started working on implementing like overnight cutting for us. We also worked on a way of communicating in a very effective way what we need and in what quantities. And then suddenly we realized that our second unit is surplus to requirements. It's not really working the way we wanted. On top of it, we were hoping for better margin differences. So we were hoping that by buying full lengths of material, we would pay a lower price per ton. Now, you could obviously fire back saying, well, why didn't we find out what would be the price difference? The thing is, we did. We reached out to probably all our existing suppliers, but it was a bit of a chicken and egg, because they didn't want to tell us what the pricing will be until we start actually ordering from them, because with volume come discounts. And yeah, they didn't really want to disclose how much cheaper it is going to be, and ended up being much less cheaper, or the difference wasn't as big as we were hoping. Therefore, it just didn't stack up. So the next step was to sort of make a very hard, tough decision and just basically stop cutting ourselves. Which we then obviously followed through. We got rid of the material. We probably still kept the racks because they're quite expensive to make. Although I know we did sell a few of them to another steel fabricator up north. So that's sort of the beginning of the unit. It's not that that's the end and we got rid of the unit, because it's not that easy. And we actually, back then, we tried to get rid of the unit, but I think it was marketed for like 4, maybe 5 months, and there was no interest. So we took it off the market and back to square one. What do we do with this unit? It obviously cost us a lot, and all the profits were now they just disappeared because we had to pay for this empty unit. In the meantime, back in 2019, we managed to acquire one of our competitors that went into liquidation, and we took on a few of their customers, and that is when we actually needed the unit. But the amount of orders that we received didn't cover the cost of the unit. So we were still losing money, but not as much as we did when it was empty. The next thing that happened was, unfortunately, COVID. And obviously initially we reacted very quickly. We decided, okay, well, we need to put people on furlough and then just fulfill the orders that we had in progress, and that's it. But then for me, that was like a wake-up call. It's like, well, the last thing I can allow for is the business to go under, no matter what the circumstances. So with the team, we quickly thought about, well, what is it that we could offer to the public so that we ensure that we don't fail. And I actually watched a video about how the Far East had to adjust to SARS and MERS and so on. And then there was this one shot of a waiter setting up this plastic screen between guests. I'm like, that's it. That's what the whole society will need if we are to somehow resume normal life. So I've ordered a few sheets of plastic, and we played a bit with it. And the goal was to set up a production line only using Screwfix as our supplier. And believe it or not, but it was actually possible. So probably similar to like the bandsaw ideas, instead of having fancy laser cutting machines, we just went for very simple table saws that we managed to somehow fine tune so it was able to cut plastic without breaking it. And the business grew exponentially. I mean, that was like the bullseye when playing darts. It was one of those beautiful ventures where it started and then just kicked off and just grew and grew, and we had orders for like 800 screens in one go. It was just wonderful. And that's when I appreciated the fact that we did have this unit empty, because without this unit we wouldn't have been able to actually set up this production of plastic protective screens. It was known under the brand WorkShield. That was our name. We had a nice website, all selling online, but then also we had distributors in the furniture world, and yeah, that was a beauty. On the steel side of things, surprisingly, construction, as you might remember, continued, and we never slowed down, and we had to unfurlough most of our staff. And actually, for some of them, it was too soon, because I think there was a rule of 2 weeks minimum furlough. And after a few days, we had to sort of get them back into the office. We're actually working remotely back then. So we even didn't qualify for the furlough scheme for them. So yeah, back to the unit. It was working great for us. Plastic screens were flying out the doors. And yeah, it was a great venture. But from the very beginning, we knew that this is a venture that was at high risk of basically becoming obsolete one day. And there came a point where we had to decide, do we continue the way we are operating using all these like subpar tools and machines, or do we actually invest into like this laser cutter and so on? And after doing some sort of risk assessments and analysis of where things are going, and also taking into account the pricing of the professional equipment, we made a decision to actually close production. That was obviously in line with the reduction in orders, significant reduction in orders. Therefore, we decided to basically scrap the whole production line. Which was great for us in terms of finances. We were able to build a nice financial cushion, and we knew that we are safe throughout COVID. But with the unit itself, we were basically back to square one, where we were left with this massive unit. And then we thought, we have to do something. We can't just have this massive unit being used in 20% or whatever the proportion was. And so we started looking for other customers. We went into doing large projects. Large projects, they're very tempting because you do a lot of steel, but unfortunately the margins there are just squeezed down to a bare minimum. The payment terms aren't as favorable. They delayed payments, and it just didn't really work for us. And again, it was on and off. When we had an order, there was work for like 3-4 guys non-stop. And then when that came to an end, there was no continuity, and suddenly they didn't have much to do. So as much as it was profitable when they were busy, but then in the times when there was a downturn, we still had to pay the overheads, and unfortunately it then balanced itself out, or actually ended up in a loss for us. So this situation continued for quite some time, and even though we managed to grow, increase the amount of orders we get for this unit, we still had this very difficult decision to make, because with the increased cost of running the business, which I discussed the other day in our Steelo podcast, it just doesn't stack up anymore. So we have to take action. We have to restructure the business. And I've proven many times before that I do everything it takes to ensure that we are in a very safe position. So quite often it might be seen as overreacting, which it probably is. But on the other hand, I prefer doing things in advance to ensure that we keep afloat without any risk. So the harsh decision is that we are getting rid of this unit. We have marketed again, but this time around, literally after a day or two of having it on the market, we already had 2 people interested in it. So now we are in the process of sorting out the paperwork and the landlord's permission and all of that. But we will be vacating the unit. Now, as it happens in life, sod's law, now when we have decided that we are letting go of this unit, suddenly there's an inflow of projects. Like suddenly our main customer for this unit is sending more and more projects, and then our other customers are also placing orders. So it almost feels like this is the worst moment of letting go of this unit. But again, that's business. In business, sometimes decisions that are made, they can't be reversed immediately. And you just have to follow through and then just continue with the decision. So at the moment, what we're aiming for is to delay the moment when we actually have to hand the unit over to the new tenant. But still, it's a much better position to be in, worrying about how we're going to fulfill orders rather than worrying about having an empty unit. And I remember in the worst days when literally the unit was empty, I walked in, was no one there, and there was this deafening silence, like you could hear a pin drop, whereas this is a manufacturing facility and it should be banging and it should be so noisy that you wouldn't be able to hear someone next to you shouting into your ear, whereas here it was just quiet. So that's the decision. And when you think about it, I think in business it's quite funny that we always think that you have to grow and grow and grow and grow. What I think the best analogy is winter and summer. In the winter, when it's cold, then we put on our jackets and coats and bobble hats and maybe double-layered trousers and so on. And that's what we do to keep warm. So we sort of increase, let's say, our capacity to keep warm, as would a business do to increase capacity for fulfilling the orders. But then when spring comes and then summer, we don't keep our coats on just in case. But unfortunately in business, when you sign a lease, it's almost like you committing to wearing that coat and all these additional layers like for the next 5 years. So that's why I've learned this lesson again. And when you run a business and you want to learn, then life will teach you all these lessons. And this is definitely one of those gems that you should really, really pay attention to being scalable, but then also being able to downsize when required, rather than have the space available for the worst case scenario, i.e. the most amount of customers you can serve, knowing that that's unsustainable. It's almost impossible to have your whole unit filled up 100% all the time, because if you have too many orders, then you are letting down your customers, so they will probably find sooner or later someone else. Whereas if you're running at 80%, then, well, guess what? 20% of that turnover is missing. Therefore, you might not be making a profit. So like with our unit or with our location, I prefer having one super busy unit, worrying about how we're going to fulfill things and being creative and implementing second, maybe sometimes third shifts and so on, rather than having two units, one of them busy and the other one not so much, if at all. Now, the other thing that I've learned, and this is something that I knew before, but I didn't really pay attention that this is the case here. It's something that the company DuPont learned. The company that does Gore-Tex layers, they've learned that the size of the factory that works for them is 150 employees, full stop. And they've learned that they can't just grow. They can't add another 20 people and then maybe 30 and then eventually set up a separate operation. They've learned that it has to be 150. And if they want to grow, instead of increasing that number, they would set up another facility with also 150 people in it, even if it was literally next door. I then found many similar analogies in other businesses and even ours, where sometimes growing a team doesn't make sense. It's better to have them in small groups that act almost independently under a single department. And what we've learned with this unit is that even though these units are very close to each other, and if you visit us, I can show you where it is. If we have the unit, I'll show you around. If we will get rid of this unit, then I'll only point you where this unit used to be. But in straight line, it's probably 30 meters, maybe 50. And as funny as it sounds, it's too close to treat them separately, but too far away to treat them as one. So what I mean by this is that with this distance, the 50 meters makes these two units almost like standalone units. And we've already felt us versus them, like, oh, we're busy over here and over there they not so busy. And even like on a daily basis, when and my office is in the unit that you're getting rid of, even though I'm here most of the day, I do pop into the other unit. But then when you think about it, I only spend maybe 10-15 minutes a day there, which means that I don't even socialize with the people that are there. So I see them, they see me, but it doesn't mean I have those coffee machine conversations or somewhere in the canteen just talking about life and what you're up to in the evening and the weekend, the things that actually matter in life. So I myself, I feel that being separated by 50 meters makes a massive difference. And on the other hand, if the other unit was, let's say, 50 miles away, then by default it would have been treated as a separate operation. So we would have a separate team there with probably a similar culture, but with their own sort of life, their own business life. They'll be talking about what they're doing, what they're up to, what their results are, and so on. So yeah, it either has to be under a single roof and single office, literally, or it has to be far enough away from each other so that they are treated as separate. And then as the owner, as for me, I would be able to visit one place and the other, but then treat them totally separate, probably down to the profit and loss and other reports, financial reports. So yeah, that's it for today. Please remember to sign up so that you don't miss out on any of our podcasts. Speak to you soon. Thank you.